Hey, and welcome back. So I'm going to take a second to make probably my first Rambly Talk video. And what it's going to be about specifically is for anybody who's either doing KonMari, has done KonMari, or just generally wants to kind of declutter. One of the things that I've noticed is it has totally swept YouTube. But the Booktube community, I feel like, has been a little bit quieter about it. I mean, and I think that if you were part of a music community, it would be the same thing with if somebody said, like, hey, take out all of your records, spill them all over the floor, and then just pick the ones that are meaningful to you and ditch the rest. That is definitely how I think a lot of us also feel about books. And there's something super sacrilegious, especially if it's books that you finish, especially if you can remember where you were when you bought it, if you can remember who you were with, or what was going on in your life, or what class you were taking. All of those things can be and are really meaningful. And so that's sort of the interesting thing is I think a lot of the resistance for people who haven't done it yet or maybe have misunderstood what it was about is they think, well, why would I want to get rid of a book like that? And I think part of the point is you absolutely shouldn't get rid of a book like that. Like if it's something where you pick it up and you have incredibly fond memories of where you were, who you were, what you were doing, and obviously specifically hopefully about that book, keep the book. But I will say that I did a declutter process about 6 months ago. And so I'm going to do a new one, I think next week, because it should be about every 6 months. Just because, the natural thing is you start to backslide a little bit, you accumulate more stuff, and then, or, maybe your tastes change and it's time to get rid of the stuff that maybe you liked 6 months ago and you don't like now. So I will probably do a video, at least like a before and after photo showing, what I kept and what I've tossed and so on. But it can be a really, I won't say it's an emotional experience, but it can be a really thoughtful experience. And so when I did it 6 months ago, and we got rid of a lot of books because both my partner and I are English majors. We did 4 years at university. And then we also did this thing, which was kind of bad for a while, where there's an amazing used bookstore in Vancouver called McLeod's, which is fantastic. It's just like towers and towers and towers of books and books lining to corridors and stacked on top of endless Persian rugs, and it's a really really cool bookstore to visit if you're ever in Vancouver. But I did what I think a lot of people do, which is you buy an armful of books at a time, and then you read one, and then you buy another armful of books and you read one, and you buy another armful. And definitely there are people who can buy 5 books, they read 5 books, they put them on their shelves, they're done, then they go back. But I think one of the interesting things that she said was for a lot of books, if you didn't read it almost as soon as you got it, you probably never will. And at first, I kind of rolled my eyes at that and I thought, like, no, 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 there are books on my shelves that I completely intend to read. And then you go, well, it's been 5 years. So when is that time going to come? And if it doesn't strike your fancy to read right now, and if it's not something you are interested in reading right now, why is it sitting there collecting dust? But you also start thinking, like, why am I hoarding this sort of like dragon's gold pile of books? And for me, and I can say this as again a former English major where there was a lot of I think C.A. Dubois has talked about this, so I'll link her below as well. But there's a lot of like name checking that often goes on, like, oh, if you don't know who Zizek is, why are you even here? If you haven't read everything by Michel Proust, what are you doing here? And so you often almost feel intimidated into buying those books because you go, well, I don't want to be an idiot. And so I'm definitely going to read The Brothers Karamazov, which I bought 7 years ago and I still have not read. And so I got rid of it. And again, I'm not in any way advocating throwing away books. We have like a good Salvation Army around the corner. But we must have taken, because my partner and I both decluttered, we must have taken, I would say, 10 full reusable bags of books to the Salvation Army. And I guess you could probably fit anywhere between 5 to 10 books in a bag. So, yeah, we must have gotten rid of between 50 to 100 books. And we're still left with 4 full bookshelves. And a lot of that stuff that's left now is either stuff that's really sentimentally important to us, books we loved, or books we're currently in the process of reading. And that changes your relationship with reading in some ways because I think that, and this is why I don't like doing TBRs, is because I think it amounts to the same thing as having that collection of you have to read this or you're dumb books on your shelves. is that then you almost get this weird sense of guilt because you're not reading those books, or you want to buy something else, or there's a new release that sounds fantastic, or there's a release from 30 years ago that you just found out about through somebody else's channel where you go, yeah, I haven't ever read that, and I just suddenly have the urge to read it. And where this really came full circle for me is even after I did my decluttering, a couple of weeks ago, I bought a copy of Kate Atkinson's Human Croquet because I thought, oh, that's her first novel. I never actually did read that. And I want to kind of read everything that she's done eventually. So I bought it and I took it home and I went to go put it on my bookshelf next to the copy of Human Croquet that I bought 2 years ago that I never read. And so that was part of the problem, is that when it is just books you are currently reading, books you love, or books that are very sentimental, you're going to remember what's on your shelves. And then the things that you add are going to be special or important. And I think the more that you let unread books pile up, the more that reading does become a weird sense of guilt or a sense of obligation as opposed to something that you're doing for pleasure. And so, the more that the Brothers Karamazov was sitting on my shelf, the more I felt like there was something sort of wrong with me as a reader, that I hadn't gotten around to it or that I didn't want to read it yet. And maybe in 6 months, I'm going to be wildly obsessed with reading it. But then I'll go out and buy probably a secondhand copy and I'll actually read it as opposed to it sitting on my shelf forever. So if you have been considering decluttering your books, but there is something about that where you think, but my books are this timeline of who I am, or they are significant, or I can tie this book that I own to a particular place in time, or a person that I used to be, or, a place I used to live. Don't get rid of those books. If when you pick those up, that's immediately what you're hit with, that wave of nostalgia, keep it. Like, that is a wonderful record. But you will probably find in the process that there are tons of books that are all but meaningless to you. And it's completely fine to acknowledge that. Or it's fine to acknowledge that there are books that you've never read, that you're probably not going to read, that you're not going to have an urge to read. And if you would rather keep 50 YA books on your shelf and ditch a bunch of classics you're not actually interested in, just do it. It's your shelf. And I think that's the most interesting thing, is I think people often think, oh no, I'm going to have to declutter, and that means that I'm going to have to get rid of all these things that are precious to me. No, totally the opposite. You're going to be left with a bookshelf that has nothing but things you love, and that's way more liberating. And when you look at your bookshelf, it reflects the things that you love. So, and you shouldn't be ashamed of whatever it is that you love to read. And I think that's what it ultimately comes down to. So I know not everybody reads the way that I do, and I know not everyone buys books for the same reason that I do. And I definitely got into a bad path of buying books to either impress other people, or that I was just buying these armful of books that I, was going to read one of because there was only one book that I was genuinely interested in reading in that moment. And then the moment passed, and then I read it, and then I went on to another book that I wanted to read that I hadn't bought yet. So, it's also a really good way to keep your finances in check if you can't afford to be buying books constantly. Like, there's a lot of things it's really positive for. So that's probably what I would say. If you've been thinking about it at all in a negative way, just give it a try. And I found it, like I said, hugely beneficial, and something that I wound up really enjoying. And now I know what's on my bookshelves for the most part, and I'm much more mindful when I'm going out to buy new books. I'm probably going to do, I think I already said this, but I'm going to do another one next week. And so I'm going to go through them and make sure that I definitely love everything that's currently on my shelves. And I'll show a little bit of that process if I can, unless that room is still too dark to film in. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, and everything, just to clarify again, everything will get either donated or given to friends and so on, but it will be removed from our apartment. That's sort of the main thing. So have you done a book decluttering? Are you considering it? Are you still kind of against it? Um, any kind of discussion you want to have surrounding that, I'd love to talk with you in the comments. So give me a thumbs up and a subscribe if you want to thumbs up and subscribe me. Otherwise, just close the window. So that seems good. Anyway, thank you again, as always, for watching. I can't do outros. I'm never going to be able to, so bye.